simp for The Sopranos. Equal parts a Wolf family sitcom and psychological illustration of one man's existential tribulations masquerading as a crime mob tale, any praise I could heap on the show, I doubt would do it the justice I feel it deserves. However, this video essay will focus primarily on the character of Tony Soprano, and why I consider him to be the quintessential television anti-hero. Not just because he was a revolutionary benchmark that opened the floodgates for some of the medium's most complex characters, but because despite him being arguably the first character of his kind to debut on the small screen, I would contend he remains the greatest and boldest due to a particular element of his character that the show fearlessly displays, that no other show, even those conceived years after The Sopranos' debut, dares to shred. That element is repugnancy. In the early seasons of The Sopranos, it is difficult to not emphasize it. Despite his immoral lifestyle, the show goes to great lengths to demonstrate that Tony's circumstances and disposition are in large part due to his upbringing and the culture he was exposed to. We get the impression that Tony, to some extent, even hates the life he has cultivated for himself. His panic attacks, depression, dreams of living a simple life, or becoming someone else entirely, all products of his subconscious screaming at him to cut and run. But this is stifled by Tony's faith in an institution that he thought would give his life purpose, a brotherhood, a family. And Tony's dedication to said institution, despite it causing turmoil for both him and those he loves, is paradoxically part of what draws us to and even gives us respect for him as a character. In the season 1 episode College, Tony, while on a college visit with his daughter Meadow, comes across former DeMeo crime family member turned FBI cooperator Fabian Petrulio. Seeking retribution, Tony tracks Fabian down and strangles him to death. HBO executives originally wanted creator David Chase to forego Tony killing Fabian, fearing that having Tony murder in cold blood would turn the audience against him. But Chase disagreed, arguing that if Tony did not kill Fabian, that the audience would see him as weak, as someone who was not truly beholden to the values he preached. With his increasingly rash decisions, despite his morally indefensible actions, it is Vic's dedication and loyalty to his own code of ethics and justice, despite how warped this code may be, that draws us to him. I would argue that this principle, that we can stick with a character who commits abhorrent acts, as long as we can understand and empathize with them, single-handedly change the face of dramatic television storytelling as we know it. And yet, even today, I still have yet to see a show that dares to portray a protagonist who not only commits a moral act, but has an element of true repugnancy, of true evil within them, other than, of course, The Sopranos. Despite how sympathetic the viewer may be towards Tony, it was the times when we could not sympathize or even empathize with his actions that truly makes him stand out among the medium's most compelling anti-heroes. The times when the writers dared to show us the most disgusting, vile side of their loved man. With Tony, this side of him first revealed itself in season 2's Davy's casino arc. Davy, a childhood friend of Tony's with a severe gambling addiction, pesters Tony to allow him to get in on his executive games. Despite his initial resistance, Tony eventually relents, leading Davy to accrue a $45,000 gambling debt. Unable to come up with the money, Tony and his associates become partners with Davy and begin running up the credit on Davy's sporting goods store, a scheme known as a bust-out, which ultimately results in Davy declaring bankruptcy and the store being foreclosed. Davy ends up separating from his wife and moves out west a broken man, with the audience later learning he was at some point committed to a mental hospital. Following the bust-out on Davy's store, it is revealed that Tony, despite his initial attempts to steer Davy away from the executive game, was aware of Davy's business and knew that had Davy dug himself into a hole, a bust-out was probable. To see Tony so blasé about his perhaps subconscious scheming to take advantage of his childhood friend's gambling addiction was the first time Tony's actions, despite the numerous crimes he had committed preceding this moment, left a sour taste in my mouth, where the evil within Tony coyly reared its head. A similar moment occurs in season 3. After being pulled over and given a citation by Officer Leon Romore, Tony asks Assemblyman Ronald Zellman to get the ticket voided. Tony later learns that Zellman, in addition to getting the ticket scratched, had Romore removed from his patrol. Tony, seemingly remorseful, asks Zellman to have Romore reinstated, but later changes his mind yet again, saying he got what he deserved. The episode ends with Tony returning to Wilmore and offering him money, which Wilmore refuses. The episode highlights the walking contradiction that is Tony Soprano in a microcosm, where we see both the redeeming and repugnant aspects of his character. When Tony resulted in it was his redemptive side that drove him to make things right. Perhaps it was his respect for the working man archetype, evident in the admiration with which he speaks of his grandfather, who was a stonemason. Later in season 4, he even dreams of himself as a stonemason, perhaps demonstrating a subconscious desire to live an honest life of hard work. This is of course coupled with him being completely oblivious that his current lifestyle relies on the exploitation of the honest working man, but I digress. But it was his repugnant side that not only resulted in him taking action against Wilmore, but him refusing to right the situation later on. Perhaps it was that Wilmore was the one person who stood up to Tony, who stripped him of the power he had grown so accustomed to. Perhaps it was seeing this honest, hardworking man hold true to his principles, something that Tony, a perpetual hypocrite, made me know. I've also heard that perhaps race played into it somehow. Something about Tony not being happy about Meadows' prospective romantic interest, Noah Tenenbaum, being black. But I don't really know if people are getting it. He seemed to be really cordial towards Noah upon their first meeting. I actually had to run out before the scene ended, but it seemed like he and Noah were getting along just swimmingly. However, despite these early displays of the repugnancy within Tony, it wasn't something I registered on my first watch. I suppose I rationalized that David Casino was a degenerate gambler and was simply facing the consequences of his own actions, or that it wasn't Tony's fault about what happened to Wilmore, as he didn't initially tell the gentleman to harm the officer's career. Well, actually, keep this in mind. We're going to come back to it.
Hey everyone. All right, so thanks for hanging out. So basically, I'm trying a little experiment. I hear vertical streaming. People love vertical streaming. I'm amazed people are watching this. So basically, here's the deal. I really want to get monetized. We're getting closer, but I want to pump those monetization hours. So I figured, what better way than to hang out and try vertical streaming while watching Sopranos videos. So yeah, that's what we're doing. I cannot believe people are actually showing up. This is crazy.
Tony's sister Janice gets into a brawl at her stepdaughter's soccer game. Prompted by her husband Bobby's ultimatum to divorce her if she cannot get her temper under control, Janice undergoes anger management and makes impressive strides. The episode comes to a close as Tony joins his sister's family for dinner and sees the success he has made. However, instead of being happy for her,
but thank you, Loom. Thank you, Woodsy T, Black. So try this, see how it goes, and hope you like hanging out and watching The Sopranos.
Janice's progress affects Tony. Earlier in the episode, Tony discusses his and his sister's temper with Dr. Melfi, attributing it to a familial curse of sorts, something they were unjustly inflicted with by their horrifically toxic mother. However, rather than acknowledging his mother's dysfunction in order to overcome his own personality flaws, Tony is simply using it as sort of a smokescreen to conceal that he has the capability to expel his rage, but simply refuses to do so, reveling in the comfort of believing he is a perpetual victim, rather than accepting responsibility for his own actions and behaviors. But this facade is shattered by Janice's success in controlling her anger with sheer will and perseverance, something Tony decides he cannot withstand. He purposefully antagonizes Janice, bringing up her estranged son Harpo, a notable tender nerve of his sisters. Upon seeing he is successful at making her break her composure, Tony smugly grins as he makes his exit. It may sound odd that in a series where we see our protagonist cheat, steal, and even murder, that this is the moment my perception of Tony began to shift. Throughout the previous seasons, the show did a tremendous job of making Tony a truly empathetic and at times even sympathetic character. Despite his numerous immoral and detestable actions, we understand he is a product of his horrendously dysfunctional upbringing and toxic environment, and thus we can, at least to some extent, understand his actions. But this was not a dysfunctional aspect of his personality he was blind to, as he openly discussed it with Melfi. It was not a momentary lapse of judgment brought about by passion or rage. It was a deliberate choice to dampen the joy and personal progress of his own flesh and blood in order to dispel his own feelings of inadequacy and self-hatred. And here is where I argue Tony Soprano stands alone among other notable television anti-heroes. While other shows humanize their morally questionable protagonists, following in the footsteps of what The Sopranos had revolutionized in its debut season, the show continued to push the envelope by going a step beyond this. Tony is not just a man beholden to his environment, his moral code, and the pressures of maintaining the existence he has cultivated for himself, but one in which a battle rages within, between the capability to be a good, righteous man who had empathy for those around him and was not negotiable does, and the true repugnancy within that, if left unchecked, will destroy his soul and transform him into an irredeemable monster. As we enter the final season, the audience is seized with the possibility that the good within Tony can overcome the repugnance. In the premiere episode, Tony is shot by his senile Uncle Junior and falls into a coma, his life hanging by a thread. He wakes in a sort of dream world as an alternate version of himself. No longer a stressed-out organized crime boss, he is a simple family man and salesman. Upon being called back from the brink of death by his daughter Meadow, Tony comes to an epiphany, cherishing each day as a gift. Throughout the first half of the season, we see glimpses of the good within Tony conquering the repugnance. When he refused to be unfaithful to his wife, when he displayed restraint and patience in dealing with the temperamental Shah of Iran, aka Joe Ricardo, when he showed compassion, well, a little, to his capo Vito after it was revealed he was homosexual. However, the repugnancy within Tony threatens to destroy the progress he has achieved. Feeling as though his associates have lost respect for him following his hospitalization, he displays dominance by viciously beating his new driver Perry unprovoked. Tony eventually decides to order Vito's death to save his relationship with New York, only to be beaten to it by Phil. And yet, despite these setbacks, following his soulful plea to Phil, following a near-death experience of his own, we are optimistic that the good within Tony, just maybe, will win the fight. But sadly, this optimism stands out during the second half of Season 6, where the repugnancy within Tony truly rears its head and begins to consume him. Him ordering his own brother-in-law to commit his first murder out of spite, his unbridled rage towards his close confidant, Polly Walnut, which almost drives him to murder, his abhorrent treatment of his friend Tess Rabkin and wife Carmela when his gambling addiction begins to spiral out of control. Note the ironic parallel to David's Casino back in Season 2. We not only see Tony at his most repugnant, but his most hypocritical. While the series opens with him lamenting that those around him have no sense of honor, respect, and brotherhood, the final stretch of the show displays Tony as a selfish coward, a petulant misanthrope, a degenerate gambler, the epitome of everything he once despised. However, it was in the episodes Kennedy and Heidi where the writers fully committed to showing the dark depths of Tony's soul, to such an extent that we as an audience have almost lost all hope of him ever being able to see the light. The episode opens with the death of Christopher Moltisanti at the hands of Tony, after a drug-induced car crash leaves him in a bloody state. Killing off the second or third most prominent character of the series in such an unceremonious fashion was bold enough, but it was Tony's reaction to his murder of Christopher that was perhaps the gutsiest turn in television history. Despite being a mentor and even father figure to Christopher, a man he claimed to love, whom he chose to avenge, rather than feeling even a shred of remorse, Tony is not even apathetic, but joyous, finding his death as a massive wave of relief. It is here we see Tony completely fall to darkness. While Christopher was not a standout guy by any means, to see Tony so void of guilt, shame, or sympathy, even for the wife and daughter Chris left behind, is abhorrent. And yet, from a writing perspective, I am frankly in awe every time I revisit this episode. That the writers had their protagonist, a man whom we were meant to empathize with and relate to, display such a repugnant aspect of his psyche is something I have not seen topped by any anti-hero archetype to follow in his footsteps. Some may say that my argument is off base, as Tony saw Christopher's daughter's car seat mangled by a tree branch, and thus it was Tony realizing that Christopher's drug use would eventually cost the life of an innocent that prompted his decision to kill him. But therein lies a deception, one that hints at the possibility that the repugnancy within Tony's soul was not something he was fully consumed by, but had been present since the very beginning. Following Christopher's death, we are treated to a dream sequence of Tony in Dr. Melfi's office, where he discloses his true, unfettered feelings of joy and relief following his murder of Christopher. Note that in this scene, a manifestation of Tony's subconscious expressing his innermost thoughts, the danger Christopher's drug use poses to his child or anyone else other than Tony is not mentioned. The car seat is a sort of red herring, if you will, a justification Tony used to rationalize his actions. And from a meta perspective, it is the writer's attempt to gaslight the viewer, to give them some rational reasoning to grasp onto to explain Tony's actions. The idea that Tony killed Christopher to prevent him from harming his own child is an easy pill to swallow, a far more justifiable line of reasoning, but it is made clear by Tony's omission of any mention of the car seat in his dream and him angrily bringing it up to strangers during Christopher's memorial service as those around him mourned their loss, that it was simply Tony needing to justify his own abhorrent act. Also note that Tony never even mentions Christopher's widow or child following the events of this episode, which conflicts with the idea that it was Tony's concern for the child's life that drove him to kill Christopher. Tony's true and sole motivation was plain and simple self-preservation. This demonstration of Tony attempting to rationalize his immoral actions to himself was seen in the series before. While Tony was initially hesitant to let Daisy into the executive team, later it is revealed he was always conscious of the possibility of Daisy becoming indebted to him. Here we see the duality within Tony once again, him playing the empathetic friend, but secretly, perhaps even subconsciously, counting on the implosion of Daisy's life for his own financial gain. He even tries to justify his actions to Meadow after he gives her Daisy's son Eric's car, citing that Daisy was a grown man and made his own decisions, for which he must now suffer the consequences. In season 3, Tony is outraged after Ralph Cifaretto murders the pregnant Tracy, highlighting his empathetic side, with Tracy acting as a thematic parallel to his daughter Meadow. Despite his sorrow over her death, he and Ralph make amends by the end of the season, and even become somewhat friendly in season 4. But after Ralph's son suffers brain damage, and he stages the killing of his and Tony's prize horse, Kaiomai, to collect on the insurance, Tony explodes in a fit of rage and kills Ralph in his own home. At the conclusion of the episode, following the disposal of Ralph's body, Tony swaps a photo of Tracy and gives it a rather ambiguous look. Many have cited this as evidence that Tony's killing of Ralph was, on a subconscious level, an effort to avenge Tracy's death, particularly when Tony, while beating Ralph, declares, however, I would argue this is simply another instance of the writers attempting to gaslight the audience in a sense. By showing the photo of Tracy, it extends to the audience the possibility that Tony's murder of Ralph was driven by his subconscious desire to avenge her. But I would argue this was deliberate misdirection, something Tony and the audience used to rationalize the murder of Ralph, to conceal the horrifying and depressing reality that Tony was more outraged over the death of a prize horse than the violent murder of an innocent teenage girl and her unborn child. It is these moments that demonstrate the extent of Tony's narcissism. He is not only able to coerce, deceive, and manipulate those around him, but is so deep in his own sociopathy, he is even able to internalize his own
donate to my favorite Hey, Dad, can I have some money to donate to my favorite multi-millionaire Twitch streamer?
With all this inflation going around? I don't think so, kiddo. Why don't you try getting a job to apply yourself?
I think I know what you mean, Dad. I'll get right on that.
Is there anything that you'd like to discuss today, Anthony?
How about the fact that I hate my son? He spends every day playing fucking Fortnite, listening to that mumble rap shit, going back and forth with some other jerk off on Reddit talking about their fucking League of Legends fan fiction. I'll smash his fucking face in. My son. What do you think about that?
Perhaps AJ's Fortnite addiction is merely a manifestation of his deep-seated desire to be the one member of your family to survive the storm of dysfunction.
Oh, yeah. Next he's telling me he wants to skibby toilet because he wants to bang a turd or some shit. I can't relate to the kid no more. I don't know whether he's ADHD, LGBT, or whatever the fuck. All I'm saying is, at the very least, he's autistic.
Hey, Dad.
Let me guess. You're back for more of my money.
No, actually. I got that job that we were talking about.
You did? Meadow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I made like 60 grand already.
Holy shit, my daughter's a genius. What kind of business is this?
I just set up an account on this app called OnlyFans, and I uploaded a couple of pictures. Next thing you know, the money's
Well, I guess at least you made 60 G's.
Well, actually, I already donated all the money to my favorite streamer, CDP445.
Melfi. Unlike the mistresses, she speaks with Father Phil and kind of admits that the mistresses weren't that much of a problem for her. She felt she was better than them. She thought that, it was just physical with them. But for once, she feels that Tony is connecting emotionally with another woman, Melfi, the therapist.